There we go. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Oops. There, okay. So there's our document. And it behaves very much like Photoshop in a lot of ways. A lot of the keyboard shortcuts are the same. Let me just reset my workspace here so it looks probably a little bit more like what you have. I'm just going to go to Essentials. Hopefully that got reset. Yeah, okay. The interface is very different in a lot of ways than Photoshop right out of the gate. There's some things that overlap, but I'm just going to show you some of the things that I would do to make this a little easier to work with. So the default workspace that this comes with is Essentials. The one that I'm going to go back to is Classic. So I'm just going to hit Classic, and it's very, very similar. What I will usually do, usually the toolbar is docked over here at the side, and just over the years, because you use so many options here, I'm just so used to tearing it off and just having it close to where I'm actually working. But the toolbar, if you don't scale it up or down, there's stuff that you may not see. So if you're looking at it and it's really tiny and you're wondering, how come I don't have those buttons? You probably just have to expand it a little more to see what I've got. Okay. Now, the tools that we're going to be using are pretty straightforward. B is brush, same as in Photoshop. Eraser. Now, another way to erase things in Flash is, rather than doing that, use the selection tool, V. So V is select. So if I hit V, I can just drag a box around everything and hit delete. And that's usually a lot faster than using the eraser tool, but you can, right? That's one way to grab stuff. Now, Flash is different than Photoshop. Flash is vector-based, but the brush behaves like a brush in Photoshop. It has similar keyboard shortcuts, right? B. There's also some size options here. So in Photoshop, if you know, you can use the square bracket keys. And what does that do? Someone tell me what that changes.
The brush size?
That's right. So you can change the brush size, or you just go over here and grab this, right? And get the brush to be either really fat and thick, or you can scale it down. Now, if you're drawing with a mouse, I understand that that's not a lot of fun. It's kind of like drawing with a brick. There's not a lot of nuance to it, but understand that it's okay for this assignment to draw with a mouse. It's mostly just to get you to analyze the footage. And by making you draw, it just slows you down. So you just pay attention to things a little bit more. Up at the top, we've also got a timeline. And you can see that right now I have one frame, just one frame, and that's it. And right now, because this frame has stuff on it, the little dot is telling me that because it's solid filled, that has stuff on it. If I grab my select tool, grabbed everything, hit delete, then you would see that this is now an empty circle. So it's an empty frame. If I want to add frames, let's say I go to frame 25. Let's say I want to have 25 frames. I go here and I right click and I say insert frame. And the keyboard shortcut is right there, F5. Now what it's done is it's given me a timeline where I can scrub. I have 25 frames. If I want 24, then I just go to the last frame and right click and say remove frames. And the keyboard shortcut is exactly the same as add, you just hold shift, right? So F5 will give you more time and shift F5 will take it away. And if you don't remember the keyboard shortcuts, just go up here and right click and say remove frames, and now I have one less frame. And if I shift F5, it will keep going back one frame at a time, but I have to click and highlight in order to do that. And if I want to add time, I hit F5. Okay. If I want to get rid of a bunch of frames, I just click and drag and highlight, and then I can right click and say remove frames. And now I go all the way back to just having one frame. Okay. Now we'll look at some more keyboard shortcuts with the timeline once we get some of the footage in here. What I'm going to do is I'm on my very first frame and I want to get that footage into Flash so I can draw over it. So I'm going to go insert, file, import to stage. And then it's going to ask me to go browse and find the footage there. So I click on the very first file of the sequence and then hit open. And then it will pop up a little dialog box saying, hey, it looks like it's a sequence. Do you want everything or just one image? So if you want the whole sequence, I say yes. And what Flash will do is it will put a new frame on, right, a new drawing on every frame, right? So a new image on every frame of my timeline. And if I hit Z for zoom and I hold down Alt, just like you would in Photoshop, I can zoom out or zoom in, and I can have a look at the footage. And I can scrub back and forth by going here. If I hit Enter, it will play. So now that I've got the footage here, I want to draw over it on another layer. So to make this a little easier, Flash, because it's a vector, it behaves different than Photoshop. Photoshop, you have layers that have opacity, and you can just slide it right away, but vector software behaves a little bit differently. I want to change the opacity of a layer. So you right-click and go to Properties, and then there's an opacity toggle. And you can change the number if you want, but the default is 50. I'm just going to leave it like that and see how that works. And all that does is just knock down the saturation a little bit. So it's just a little bit easier to see. Now this layer, if I want to lock it, I can click on this padlock icon. And that means that now this layer is protected. I cannot select, move, edit, do anything to this layer, which is what I want. If I click on this layer, that's the visibility. I can turn the layer's visibility on and off. And I want to draw on top of this footage with a new layer. So I just go click on the plus sign, new layer, click. And this layer I'll just name, this is going to be my drawings. And this layer I could double click and name, call this is going to be my reference. Great. So now I'm on this frame. And what I'll start with is I'll go have a look and see if I can find contact. So let's say that's my contact pose, or I might say maybe that my contact pose, but I probably like that one. Then I'll grab my brush tool and let's pick a color that's going to show up a little bit better. Let's see how that works. And what we're trying to just identify are the 4 keys. So I would start, again, you can write some notes and we can do some drawings, but I would look at this first and look at this and go, okay, there's a contact pose. And you can see that right now, I'm actually on frame 17, but the drawing is on frame 1 because that's the only key that it has. So what I need to do is go here, and what I'm going to draw is I need to put down a new piece of paper. So I'm going to right click and say, Insert blank keyframe. So that gives me this frame here. You see it's empty, right? It's an open circle. There's nothing on it. So now I can draw, write notes, etc. There's my contact pose. And that drawing now lives at frame 17. This is actually lining up. That's one of the odd things about the way Flash behaves, right? So this drawing is now held, just like frame 1, that drawing is held all the way until there's another dot. So you have to go make a new blank drawing, otherwise it's just hold. Okay, so I'll go find another contact pose. Let's say there. That's a contact pose. Now, if you want, you can right click and you can say insert a blank keyframe, which is like a blank piece of paper, or you can make a copy and say insert keyframe. And that makes a copy of this drawing. You know, why would you do that? Well, let's say over here, I did a little drawing analysis of my footage, kind of looking at the major anatomical landmarks, get an idea of the pose. Head, this angle, I'm not going to worry about the arms too much. I'm going to focus mostly on the spine. There's a contact. If I go here, let me just right click and clear that keyframe. If I right click here and say insert keyframe, it gives me a copy. So I can use my select tool and drag this over and then see if it's kind of similar. The only thing I have to do is just reverse which leg is in front. And of course, the drawing may not be very accurate. So I'd have to go in here and I could use my lasso tool to grab parts and then just hit delete and then just redraw them and say, okay, well, there's that foot here. There's that leg. And I can really tell that, okay, this leg, this is the left leg and this is the right leg. So I don't get confused. In this view, I can definitely see more of the chest turned towards me. So Grab my eraser. And then I might sort of try and anchor in. That's where I see the arms like that and the head's pointing up like that. So these are mostly little scribble studies, right? Gesture drawings. So this is what I'm focused on mostly, is looking at the gesture and finding out pieces of information that will help me. So one of the things that will help is how far in front is that foot relative to the hips, let's say, right? So if I want to draw a line where the hips are they pretty close, right? Or is it really close? Is it under the body? When I look at this footage, this leg is definitely further from the center of the hip than this one. And why might that be? Well, there's some weight that's being distributed back here. So to counter that, I have to take a longer stride forward so I can balance back. So this is just like taking notes. I'm just trying to be a little bit better at observing things rather than just staring at a frame and trying to copy it all. Just write some notes for myself. The front view is very important to understand things like twist and tilt. The leg is not coming straight down, right? It's going towards the center line. If you look at the center line kind of running through perspective, there's that. I can also look and see, well, where is the hip twisting? I can see that the chest is kind of twisting a bit this way, and the hip is turned a bit that way. So that helps me understand angles a little bit better than the side view. The side view, I may not understand the twisting as much, okay? And then I could look at things like, well, look at the head, and I can see, well, where's the center line? Where's that crosshair? Okay, there, that's pointed that way. How high up are the elbows relative to one? Are they in the same place? A little bit different. So this just helps me kind of understand the walk cycle a little more clearly. And it's a good idea to look at your two contact positions and see how similar they are. Again, human beings aren't robots. It's not going to be symmetric. You'll probably notice in your footage, maybe on one contact, you leaned over to the right more or the left more. But you have to make a decision when you make a cycle, pick one of them and mirror it. Because if you do two unique ones, it may look fine if the character's walking out of screen, but if they're walking on a cycle on the spot over and over again, every little difference is just going to be so much more noticeable because you're repeating it over and over and over. So what I would suggest is have a look at your cycle and see if the person is trying to walk symmetrically, then pick one side and mirror that. You don't have to copy it completely accurately to what you see in the reference. But if someone is walking deliberately, asymmetrically, a limp, a zombie walk, something that is absolutely intentionally different on one side of the body versus the other, then you would have two unique contact poses. Every side would be unique. So you couldn't just take one contact pose and mirror it, it wouldn't work. Okay? Is that clear? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, right? So it really depends a lot on the footage. In Flash, you can turn on the rulers and you can go to the ruler and drag down a guide. So what you might try and do is look at in the side view, maybe I'm going to track the head. And I could use that as reference, say, well, where does the head? And I can see, let's find where the head goes up the highest. And they go, maybe here, here. Yeah, maybe that one. And I might drop that guide right there. So that's the high point. That's as high as we go, right? And then I'll look and see, well, what about the other step? Do we get up that high? No, that one's higher. How about this one? Yeah, that's really close. So I know that this high point is much more similar to this one, but this one is different. We're a little bit low. Okay, so just by having that little ruler there, it'll help you judge things a little more carefully. You could do the same thing if you wanted to look at, again, vertical guides. Maybe you want to grab a guide and have a look and track something. Say, well, is the elbow always that far out in front? With footage like this, right, what you're stuck with is the character is moving through space, so they're not on a treadmill. Okay, so some of those things are not as obvious to sort of reveal. Okay, and what I want you to draw are all of the key poses. There's the contact. There's the down. So if I go here and hit F7 blank, this is the down. So what are we looking for? Well, usually what you see is the foot is flat and the knee is bent. That's where all the weight is taken. So we're going from contact to down. I want to see how low does the hip go. both feet are still on the ground, right? What happens to the upper body? Is it leaning back as far? So if I kind of imagine that line, does that angle change from here to here, right? Yeah, it does. It feels like the angle of the body has changed slightly. It was tilted back further here than here. So, okay, that's something important to note. Great. So contact, down, then I'll look for the passing position. So I put a blank drawing one frame early. So how do I move this? Well, what you do is you click and it's highlighted. Then I click and hold and drag. So I can move frames around by just clicking to highlight, click, drag to move. Click to highlight, click, drag to move. Same thing. Start by figuring out where's the hip, which leg is closest to camera. Try and figure out what's going on with the spine. And the arms are kind of like low priority at this moment. That shape. There's the passing position. There's the push off right there. Push off. Right, that's passing. And there's the push off. And I would recommend you would draw not only the side view, but also the front view, okay? That will show you a lot of things like balance. When I look at that leg that's on the ground, I can see that it points out to the side. I can see a very clear tilt here and even across the chest, right? So the tilt, there's an angle. So it feels like the whole body is tilting more this way. That you wouldn't get from the side view. That wouldn't be as obvious to see. But here in the front view, I get a really clear gesture line. Okay. So this is going to be part of your submission for next week. So you're going to do the blocking from your video reference, right? Contact down, passing, push up, those 4 poses. And I want to see the flash file. I want you to hand in the flash file so I can see that you actually drew over the footage and looked at it. Okay, the drawings don't have to be very beautiful.